The courtroom was silent until the judge's words cut like a blade. "Remove that medal. You don't deserve it." Gasps filled the room. On her uniform, polished but worn from years of service, the silver star shone under the harsh lights. It was the medal she earned in blood, in fire, in a place most people would never dare to stand. But now, a man in a black robe was demanding she take it off, as if it was nothing more than stolen jewelry. She sat in her wheelchair, her body broken from combat but her spirit unshaken. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Some eyes turned away, in shame, others in disgust. The judge leaned forward, his voice cold, dismissive, full of arrogance. "You want respect? Not here, not in my courtroom. Take it off." For a moment, her hand trembled, not from fear but from rage held tightly. Inside that medal wasn't just hers. It belonged to the brothers who didn't make it home, to the silence of the sea, to the flag that draped their coffins, and this man wanted her to strip it away, to erase it. She looked up at him, her eyes steady, her voice firm but calm. "You have no idea what this means." What happened next would shake the courtroom, silence the whispers, and mark the beginning of the end of his career. Because this disabled sealed this woman, who had already lost so much, was about to show the world that no judge, no robe, no gavel, could erase the truth of what she had given. Her name was Commander Sarah Blake, a Navy SEAL, who had spent over a decade in the shadows of war. Most people never knew that women served in combat like that. Fewer knew that one of them had earned one of the nation's highest honors, the Silver Star. But Sarah didn't live like a hero. She lived quietly, humbly, rolling through life in a wheelchair that replaced her legs. A roadside bomb had stolen them years ago, along with pieces of her body she would never get back. Yet it couldn't touch her courage. Now she was in a courtroom, not a battlefield. She wasn't fighting enemies in camouflage, but injustice in a suit and tie. It was supposed to be a simple case, a hearing to settle a dispute with the city over veteran housing. But the judge, he had his own agenda. He saw her medals as distractions, her uniform as theatrics. He didn't care that she had spilled her blood for the very freedoms that gave him his seat of power. As she sat before him, she realized this battle was different. Here, courage wasn't measured in bullets or explosions. It was measured in words, in dignity, in refusing to bow when someone tried to strip away your honor. And while Sarah stayed calm, others in the room wondered what kind of woman had the strength to stare down a judge, to hold her ground when even the law tried to push her aside. The answer would come soon enough. The judge's demand still echoed in the courtroom, but Sarah didn't flinch. She had faced worse men than him, men with guns, men with hatred in their eyes. This was just another battlefield. Still, the sting of it cut deep. To have her honor questioned, in front of strangers, by a man who had never known war, it burned. But Sarah had learned long ago that strength wasn't about exploding in anger. It was about control, patience, timing. She wheeled back from the table, her hand steady on the rims. Her lawyer whispered, "We can object, we can push back." But Sarah lifted her hand. Not yet, because this wasn't just about a medal. It was about dignity. It was about every veteran who had ever been told they didn't matter. The people in the courtroom shifted, whispering. Some of them knew her story, others only saw the chair, the missing legs, and the silver star pinned proudly above her heart. But all of them could feel the tension rising. Sarah remembered the day she earned it. The firefight had been chaos. A convoy ambushed, her team pinned down, explosions lighting up the night. She had dragged 2 men from the wreckage before the blast that stole her legs. She never liked talking about it, never wore the medal to show off, but she wore it today for her brothers, for those who couldn't be there. And now, this man wanted it gone. The judge leaned back in his chair, smug. "You're in a court of law, not on a parade ground. This decoration is irrelevant. Remove it now." Sarah locked eyes with him, calm, controlled. "With respect, Your Honor," she said softly, "this is not decoration. This is sacrifice. This is blood. This is the reason I'm sitting in this chair." The room went still, but the judge scoffed, waving his hand as if brushing away dust. Her lawyer spoke up then. "Your Honor, this medal is part of her service. Recorded, speaks directly to her character." But the judge cut him off. "Irrelevant. This is my courtroom, and I won't allow theatrics." The words stung. Theatrics, as if nearly dying for your country was just a show. Sarah breathed slowly, steadying herself. She wasn't here to fight a war of insults. But inside, the memories pressed against her chest, the sound of gunfire, smell of smoke, the cries of the wounded, the faces of men she carried in her heart every single day. She didn't want to remember, but the judge's words forced it all back. And as she sat there, silent, people began to murmur. A woman in the back stood, whispering to her neighbor. A man shook his head. The tension was growing. Everyone could see the injustice. The judge, blinded by his pride, couldn't. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Commander Blake, I won't." "Say it again, remove that medal." Sarah placed her hands on the armrests of her chair. She pushed herself forward slowly, her eyes never leaving his. And then she spoke, her voice steady, low, but strong enough for everyone to hear. "You want me to take it off? Fine. But no, this you are not taking it from me. You're taking it from every man who died on that field, from every family who never got their son back, from every flag folded and handed to a mother's shaking hands. If you strip this medal, you strip them." The words hit like gunfire. The air grew heavy. The room, once restless, was now stone silent. The judge blinkered, startled for the first time. But before he could respond, Sarah reached up with slow, deliberate motion. Her fingers brushed the medal, gasps filled the air. Some thought she was giving in, others leaned forward, waiting. She held the medal in her hand, feeling its weight, its sharp edges against her palm. It wasn't gold or silver that mattered. It was the lives tied to it, the memories, the blood dot. And then, instead of placing it on the desk before the judge, she turned slowly, holding it high for the courtroom to see. "This," she said firmly, her voice echoing, "does not belong to him, it belongs to them. And no judge on this earth has the power to erase that." The room erupted. Veterans in the crowd stood. A Marine in dress blues saluted. Even civilians rose to their feet, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. The judge banged his gavel furiously. "Order, sit down. This is contempt." But the tide had shifted. Sarah remained calm, lowering the medal, pinning it back on her chest with hands that didn't shake. She looked at him again, and in her eyes, there was no fear. "You can hold me in contempt, Your Honor," she said quietly. "But I will never hold myself in shame." The gavel slammed again, but his authority, in that moment, felt smaller than the woman before him, because the truth had been spoken, and everyone in that room knew it. For the rest of the hearing, the judge tried to regain control. He spoke louder, harsher, trying to bury his humiliation beneath legal jargon, but the people weren't listening to him anymore. They were watching her. They were remembering her words. And when the transcript of that day reached the press, when her defiance reached the ears of generals, admirals, and lawmakers, the judge's name would become a stain on the very justice he claimed to uphold. But in that moment inside that room, it was only Sarah Blake, sitting tall in her chair, proving that courage didn't end when the battlefield was gone. It lived on, even in the face of arrogance, even in the shadow of a gavel. After the hearing ended, Sarah wheeled herself out of the courthouse. Reporters had gathered on the steps, their cameras flashing like gunfire. Microphones were thrust forward, questions fired in rapid bursts. "Commander Blake, how do you feel about the judge's order? Do you think this was discrimination against veterans? Will you comply with his ruling?" Sarah didn't answer, not yet. She wasn't here to make headlines. She had lived her life in the shadows, serving silently, and she wasn't about to turn herself into a spectacle. But silence doesn't last long when the truth is burning to be told. Her lawyer leaned down and whispered, "You don't have to say anything. We'll file an appeal." Sarah shook her head. "This isn't about me," she whispered back. "This is about what that medal means." Still, she stayed quiet, moving carefully through the crowd. And yet those who watched her didn't see weakness, they saw dignity. A woman wounded but unbroken, a warrior who had endured enough battles to know that sometimes the strongest answer is silence. But silence has power. By the end of that day, video clips of her words in the courtroom had spread across the internet. Veterans groups shared it, calling her a symbol of strength. Military families reposted it with pride. Strangers who had never set foot on a battlefield wrote messages of support. And then came the backlash. The judge doubled down, releasing a statement calling her a disruptive force who tried to turn a legal proceeding into a political show. He claimed the courtroom was no place for medals and uniforms. It backfired, because for every word he spoke, there were thousands more standing against him. Veterans lined the courthouse steps the next day, some in uniform, some in wheelchairs, some holding folded flags. They weren't there to make noise. They were there to bear witness. Inside, Sarah felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had never asked for a fight like this. She never wanted the spotlight. But the truth was simple. She couldn't back down, because every insult, every dismissal, every demand to strip away her honor wasn't just aimed at her, it was aimed At everyone who had sacrificed. She remembered one night in Afghanistan, crouched in the dirt, her team under fire. One of the younger SEALs had looked at her, fear flashing in his eyes. "Why do we do this? Why do we keep running toward the bullets?" he asked. Sarah had answered without thinking, "Because someone has to." And now, all these years later, she realized the battlefield had changed, but the mission hadn't. Someone still had to. The hearings dragged on for weeks. Each time Sarah appeared in court, she wore her uniform. Each time, the judge glared at the medal pinned to her chest. And each time, she sat taller, calmer, stronger. The tension grew. Spectators filled the benches, waiting for the next clash. Lawyers argued. Motions were filed. But in the end, people weren't there for legal arguments. They were there to see if honor could withstand arrogance. And Sarah, though she never asked for it, had become the symbol of that fight. The judge's frustration boiled over one morning. He slammed his gavel, red-faced, shouting, "This courtroom will not be turned into a circus." Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She only said, quietly, "The only circus here is a man in a robe thinking he can erase a war with a word." The gallery gasped. The judge froze. And though he tried to mask it, his authority cracked a little more, because the truth has a way of breaking through. Even in the coldest rooms, Sarah knew she wasn't alone anymore. The movement was building outside those walls, voices louder than any gavel, stronger than any insult. Veterans wrote letters. Senators called for investigations. Generals spoke her name with respect. But Sarah didn't care about politics. She cared about one thing, the promise she had made to her brothers in arms. Never let their sacrifice be forgotten. Every time she touched the medal on her chest, she remembered their faces, their laughter, their last words. The weight she carried wasn't metal, it was memory. And though the judge thought he could strip it away, he was about to learn that some things cannot be silenced, because battles don't always end with explosions. Sometimes, they end in silence, in dignity, in the steady voice of a soldier who refuses to bow. Sarah Blake was ready for that battle, and the judge was not. The days turned into weeks, and the courtroom became less about legal arguments and more about a battle of willpower. The judge tried everything to break her. He interrupted her lawyer mid-sentence, dismissed key evidence, and sneered at her testimony. He mocked her service, calling it irrelevant background noise. Every move, every word, was a new insult. But Sarah never cracked. She sat in silence. When he raged, she spoke softly. When he tried to shout her down, she carried herself with dignity, her uniform pressed, her medals shining under the cold lights. And that dignity began to turn the tide. People filled the gallery each day. Veterans in wheelchairs rolled in beside her. Mothers who had buried sons sat quietly in the back, holding folded flags. Younger soldiers still serving came in uniform to stand behind her. It wasn't just a case anymore. It had become a movement. But the judge couldn't see it. All he saw was defiance, a challenge to his authority. And authority was something he refused to share. One morning he ordered her to appear without her uniform. "This is not a military tribunal," he barked. "This is a civilian court. You will dress accordingly." Sarah looked at him, steady and calm. "With respect, Your Honor, this uniform is not a costume. It is who I am." He leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "Not in here, it isn't. In here, you are nothing more than another litigant. Do you understand?" The gallery erupted with whispers. A Marine veteran stood and shouted, "She's more than you'll ever be." Bailiffs rushed to silence him, dragging him out as the judge hammered his gavel furiously. Sarah didn't move. She didn't rise to his bait. She only said, quietly, "You may not see it, but everyone else does." The words echoed, heavy in the silence that followed. The judge's face flushed red. He banged the gavel again, his voice cracking with anger. "One more outburst from you, Commander, and I will hold you in contempt." But it wasn't Sarah who looked small in that moment. It was him. Outside the courtroom, the world was shifting. News networks ran the story. Headlines read, "Judge orders disabled SEAL to remove medal." Opinion columns tore into him. Veterans organizations filed complaints. Senators demanded answers. The judge, feeling the heat, doubled down. He called the media a circus, the veterans a mob, and Sarah Blake a manipulator. But his words only fueled the fire. And through it all, Sarah stayed silent. Her lawyer urged her to give a press conference, to defend herself publicly, but she refused. "I don't need to defend myself," she said. "The truth doesn't need my words, it speaks for itself." That calmness only made her stronger. The people saw her restraint, her dignity, and it drew them closer. The more the judge lashed out, the more he revealed his own arrogance still. The courtroom battles grew harsher. He denied her requests for accommodations. He cut short her testimony. At one point he even accused her of using her disability to garner sympathy. The words landed like a slap. Gasps filled the room. Sarah sat still, her jaw tight, her eyes cold. For a moment, everyone thought she would finally break, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low but sharp. As steel, this wheelchair is not a prop. These scars are not sympathy cards. They are the cost of your freedom, Judge. And the fact that you cannot see that says more about you than it ever could about me. The courtroom exploded. Applause thundered. Through the gallery, veterans rose to their feet, saluting. The bailiff scrambled to restore order, but it was too late. The judge's words had backfired, and Sarah's words, they burned into memory. Still, the judge pressed on. His pride wouldn't let him back down. He believed his robe made him untouchable, his gavel absolute. But cracks were forming. Behind the scenes, officials began investigating. Whispers reached the courthouse. Generals were watching. Senators were listening. Even the Pentagon had taken interest. Sarah didn't know the details, but she could feel the shift. Every time she rolled into the courtroom, she wasn't alone. The line of veterans behind her grew longer. The voices outside grew louder. One morning as she wheeled in, the crowd outside stretched around the block. Flags waved in the air. Veterans stood at attention. Mothers held photos of their sons. Reporters shouted questions, but the people drowned them out with a single chant. Honor her. Honor them. Honor us. Inside, the judge's fury grew. He slammed his gavel, his voice cracking. This court will not bow to outside pressure. This is my courtroom, and my word is final. But everyone in that room knew the truth. His word was slipping. His grip on power was loosening. The tension rose to a breaking point during one of the final hearings. The judge, desperate, ordered the bailiff to remove Sarah from the courtroom. Your presence here is a distraction, he snapped. You are dismissed. The gallery erupted in outrage. Veterans shouted, shame. Mothers wept openly. The bailiffs hesitated, unsure. Sarah placed her hands on her wheels, steady. She didn't resist. She didn't shout. She only looked at the judge one last time and said, you can order me out of your courtroom, Judge, but you cannot order me out of history. And with that, she wheeled herself out, her head high, her medal gleaming in the light. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel strike. That night, the video of her words spread like wildfire. Millions watched, millions shared. Generals called her personally. Senators released statements. Even the families of fallen soldiers recorded messages of support. And the judge, his silence spoke volumes. The walls were closing in, though he refused to see it. His arrogance blinded him. His pride chained him. But the truth was catching up fast, because Sarah Blake was not just a woman in a wheelchair, not just a veteran, not just a Silver Star recipient. She was a symbol now, a living reminder that honor cannot be stripped by arrogance, that sacrifice cannot be erased by pride. And soon, the world would see just how much weight that symbol carried. The storm was building. The reveal was coming. The courtroom was packed to the walls when Sarah returned for what was supposed to be the final hearing. The air was electric, heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew something was coming, though no one knew quite what. The judge sat taller than ever, his gavel gripped tight, his jaw locked. He thought today he would reclaim control. Today he would silence her once and for all. But Sarah, she looked almost calm, her uniform pressed, her silver star gleaming, her eyes steady as stone. The hearing began with the same arrogance. The judge interrupted her lawyer, mocked her testimony, and called her medal a distraction. His voice rang sharp, but fewer people listened. The gallery had shifted. They weren't here for him anymore. They were here for her. And then the doors opened. The sound of polished shoes echoed down the aisle. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled. A man in full dress uniform entered, his chest heavy with ribbons and stars. His presence carried with the kind only decades of command could give, that it was a 4-star admiral. The judge's gavel froze mid-air. The admiral strode forward, his face stern, his eyes locked on the bench. He stopped beside Sarah's wheelchair, placing one hand on her shoulder. Then he turned, facing the judge. Your Honor, he said firmly, his voice echoing through the chamber. This woman is Commander Sarah Blake, Navy SEAL, Silver Star recipient, wounded in action while saving American lives. She does not stand alone in this room. She stands with the Navy. She stands with her country. The gallery erupted. Veterans leaped to their feet, saluting. Families clapped. tears streaking their faces. Even reporters lowered their cameras, stunned by the weight of the moment. The judge tried to recover, pounding his gavel. "This is my courtroom. I will not have military theatrics disrupt the rule of law." But the admiral cut him off, his voice thundering. "No, Judge. What you will not have is the dishonor of stripping a warrior of her sacrifice in front of those she fought to protect." The words landed like cannon fire. The judge stammered, his authority crumbling. This is highly irregular. This is contempt of court." Sarah finally spoke, calm, clear, her voice stronger than ever. "Contempt," she said. "The only contempt here is the way you've treated every veteran who gave their blood for your right to sit in that chair. You tried to take my medal, but you cannot take my honor. You cannot take their memory, and you cannot take the truth." Silence. Heavy, absolute. Then the admiral stepped forward, his posture sharp, his salute crisp. He turned not to the judge but to Sarah. "Commander Blake," he said, voice breaking slightly, "on behalf of the United States Navy, and in honor of every life you saved, I salute you." The room held its breath. Sarah raised her trembling hand, returning the salute from her chair. In that instant, rank, disability, courtroom wars, none of it mattered. What mattered was respect. What mattered was truth. And the truth had won. The judge, red-faced and shaking, tried one last desperate swing. "This is outrageous. This is intimidation. I will report this." But it was too late, because at that very moment a court officer stepped forward with a sealed letter. He handed it to the clerk, who read aloud, effective immediately. "Judge Harold Greaves is under federal investigation for misconduct. He is hereby suspended from the bench pending review." The gavel slipped from his hand, clattering uselessly against the wood. His power, his arrogance, his career, it all crumbled in seconds. The gallery roared, not with chaos, but with triumph. Veterans embraced. Families cried. Reporters shouted, desperate to capture history in words. Sarah sat quietly through it all, her silver star shining under the lights. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged. She hadn't lowered herself to his level. She had simply stood no wheeled her ground. And in the end it was enough to bring him down. As bailiffs escorted the disgraced judge out, Sarah whispered a single sentence, almost to herself, but loud enough to be heard. "You thought you could take away what I bled for, but all you did was remind the world why I bled at all." The words echoed long after the doors closed. And with that, the battle was over. Sarah Blake had won, not just for herself, but for every voice the judge had tried to silence. When the courtroom emptied, Sarah didn't bask in victory. She didn't raise her fist or celebrate the judge's downfall. That wasn't who she was. She simply wheeled herself out the doors into the cool evening air. The crowd outside erupted, cheering, chanting her name. Veterans saluted. Mothers wept. Reporters shouted questions. But Sarah's eyes weren't on the cameras. They were on the flags waving in the breeze. Because for her, this fight had never been about a medal. It was about what the medal represented. She thought of the brothers she lost on that night in Afghanistan. The firefight, the chaos, the weight of 2 men she had dragged from the wreckage before the blast took her legs. The sound of silence that followed when the last gunshot faded. Every time she touched her silver star, she didn't feel pride. She felt their presence. She carried their memory in her chest like a heartbeat that never faded. That judge had tried to strip it away, to reduce it to nothing but metal on a uniform. But honor isn't made of silver. It isn't granted by a court. It isn't subject to a gavel. Honor lives in sacrifice, in blood spilled far from home, in mothers who bury their sons, in daughters who never get to hug their fathers again. Sarah knew the truth. A medal can shine or tarnish, but the meaning behind it will never fade. As she moved through the crowd, she heard a young soldier's voice call out, "Commander Blake." She turned. A private, barely out of his teens, stood at attention, saluting her with tears in his eyes. "You give us hope," he said, his voice cracking. "You show us it matters." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. She returned the salute, her voice low but firm. "It always matters. Never forget that." For every cheer, for every cheer, for every salute, she reminded herself it wasn't for her, it was for them. The ones who never came home. The judge's career was over. His arrogance had been shattered by the very people he dismissed. But Sarah didn't dwell on that. His downfall wasn't the victory. The victory was the reminder that sacrifice still means something, that honor cannot be erased, that the truth always rises, no matter how hard someone tries to bury it. Later that night, when the crowd was gone and the cameras were dark, Sarah sat quietly by herself. The medal lay heavy in her hand. She ran her thumb along its edge, closing her eyes. "Rest easy," she whispered. They can't take you away from me. She pinned it back to her chest, the weight, both heavy and light all at once. Her fight was over. But the meaning of it would last long after her. Because in the end, Sarah Blake hadn't just defended her honor, she had defended the honor of every warrior who gave everything and asked for nothing. And that, she knew, was the legacy worth leaving. Asterisk, if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Too many men and women like Commander Sarah Blake carry scars we'll never see, sacrifices we can never repay. What we can do is honor them by remembering, by respecting, and by refusing to stay silent when their dignity is questioned. So if you believe her fight mattered, take a moment now, like this video, subscribe for more stories of courage, and most importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because every share, every view, every voice added keeps their memory alive. Honor cannot be taken by arrogance. It lives in us when we choose to remember. Let's never forget.